Good afternoon, everybody. Let's see, we still have a few people coming in. I'm going to give them a few more seconds. Okay. Not quite leveled off. Very good. I think we're going to go on and get started. First of all, welcome to this little virtual workshop that we're going to have called How Vision Mapping Takes an L&D Strategy from Good to Great. My name's Stephen Casbeer, and I'm a principal consultant at CCC. In that role, I advise and work with clients to help drive value out of their content, establish strategic goals, and align their action plans and overall direction with a larger organizational objectives. And with me today is my colleague, Renee Swank. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Renee, and I'm a senior director, and I work in CCC's professional services team. I have over 25 years of experience in content and knowledge management. And in the past several years, my focus has been working with educational publishers and training organizations with their digital transformation initiatives.
Thanks, Renee. So I'm going to start just give a brief, very brief background on CCC. CCC is a not-for-profit company whose roots are as a collective licensing aid organization. We collect rights from publishers and we make those rights available to clients. Over time, CCC grew as a technology organization and acquired a UK-based consultancy named Ixis about 4 years ago. Ixis had been working by providing content and knowledge management solutions for almost 20 years, with an emphasis on learning content and educational publishing. Bringing that wealth of experience to CCC, we're headquarters in Danvers, Massachusetts, with offices across North America, Europe, and Asia. You can see the growth from you can see our growth from a collective license agent to solution provider in the variety of products and services that we offer. We do still offer collective licenses, and one of which is often of interest to our L&D clients is the motion picture license, which allows you to show scenes from movies as well as full-length features and TV shows. Renee and I both work in the professional services organization where we advise clients on matters related to digital transformation and linking strategies into action. We found that L&D organizations deal with many of the same issues as publishers, and our history in education publishing allows us to bring a very unique perspective to our L&D clients. Today, we'd like to have a little bit of fun. We're going to get interactive, and we're going to have a virtual consulting simulation session with everybody that's in the little virtual room today. But first, we're going to talk a little bit about vision mapping and how it can be used to drive L&D strategy. And we'll explore one path that may come out of a vision mapping exercise, that of digital transformation. And we'll talk about what that means for L&D. So I hope you're all ready to have a little bit of fun this afternoon. Our approach to vision mapping is designed to really answer 3 questions. The first is strategic. Where am I going and where should I start? We also look at what we need to do to change and how we need to get there. What are the things that need to change in order to allow us to get to where we want to be? And operationally, what do I need to put in place in order to get going? We do this in a series of workshops, typically over a few days, and the entire exercise from beginning to end is generally about 3 to 4 weeks. At the end of a vision mapping, our clients have a wealth of information to help them move forward. And in fact, one client commented to us recently that they now have an armory of actions that will be able to add demonstrable value to their organization. So in order to set up our little virtual consulting simulation, I'd like to review some of the challenges and objectives that we see in L&D organizations, and maybe they'll sound familiar to you. CLOs are focused more and more on the strategic elements of the business. They, you, are all working every day to find ways to increase the value and relevance of L&D in the organization. In addition to those things that we see on the slide here, L&D leaders have told me that they need to help drive revenue, or they may have major compliance requirements to manage. That focus on value and relevance to the business leads directly to designing key processes and building teams that address some of these objectives. It also leads to a number of questions that come to the forefront. How can we deliver engaging, relevant, impactful learning experiences that are available on demand to meet the needs of all employees? How can we demonstrate the impact of learning on employee performance and on critical business objectives? And how do we explore new approaches to deliver learning in the flow of work and engage employees? You can see these issues reflected in quotes from L&D leaders that appeared in the Harvard Business Review about a year and a half ago, but they really do still resonate today. Elisabetta Galli of Banco Santander talks about learning in the flow of work and consumer-grade experiences for learners. Helen Smith of Sainsbury's identifies that we need to understand the practical realities of daily work life and fit into that as an L&D organization. And Ann Schulte of Procter & Gamble is very clear that experimentation, rapid cycle feedback, and I'll add the word agility, are business critical. And that applies to L&D as well, because without that, you really can't support a business with those characteristics. And learners are demanding more. As Elisabetta Galli said it so well on the previous slide, the learner experience is critical. And that's one of the large drivers that we're seeing for digital transformation. So all of this could be driving the people on your team crazy as they deal with things like learning content locked up in silos across the organization, assets stored in SharePoint, Articulate, Dropbox, local drives, shared drives, in the cloud, everywhere, unfortunately, making it very difficult to discover content. What's more, it makes it nearly impossible to find and reuse valuable learning content. It's not uncommon for people to recreate materials because they couldn't find or were actually unaware of the original files. And without a single source of truth for learning content, teams run the risk of needless duplication and version control issues that can end up sharing or updating the wrong content, which wastes valuable time and money. This slide captures many of the challenges that L&D organizations have today when trying to enable the agility that's needed to respond to the needs of their business and align with the strategies of the business, and also to provide that exceptional learner experience. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Renee to talk a little bit about the digital transformation for L&D.
Yep. So let's level set on the meaning of what we're talking about when we say digital transformation, and I want to start with a broad understanding. And I really like this definition from Forbes because it's about leveraging technology to bring new user experiences to consumers, and that can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different industries. And for construction equipment, digital can mean modern machines can push data back to manufacturers so that they can send trends on maintenance issues. Well, pushing usage data back to sources, that sounds familiar. And Netflix, a decade ago, they went from a business model of direct mailing DVDs to a cloud streaming service, but they also capture a lot of analytics about what we watch. And they use that to not only personalize recommendations, but may also make content investment choices. CLOs, of course, would like to do the same. And home automation, our light switches, thermostats, and refrigerators are all gone digital. And these are all examples of innovation about giving new digital experiences to customers and employees. But what does digital transformation mean for learning and development? Well, for some companies, they take course materials like instructor-led slides, course books, user guides, reference documents, and they make them available online in their LMS, maybe as PDFs or maybe even better, ebooks or HTML pages. They might chunk them, but their online versions often mimic the organization and structure of their physical equivalents. And even with online only courses, the user experience can feel a lot like paper behind glass with the ability to do some full text searching. And is that digital? Well, yes, but is it really transformational? Maybe not so much. So there are many hazards that we see along the journey to digital transformation. And I really wish I could tell you that all you need to do is buy some software and you can achieve some digital transformation overnight. But really, technology is not the magic bullet. It's not the only answer by itself. And we see companies that they create and deliver online courses, but they're still very linear and very print-based in the way that they process their content. And then of course they may forget about change management. And we all know that it takes people to drive and embrace transformation. So looking at that journey, where is the destination? What direction are we driving towards? What's the vision? What kinds of innovative capabilities are possible? Well, there's just so many ideas. And of course, adaptive learning is something that's on the capabilities that are being achieved today. But also out of that, the analytics that capture the experience and the flow of work from students, like Stephen was describing earlier, and using that data to drive decision making, that's really where innovation is taking new turns. So as I described, digital transformation is a journey, and it evolves over time and sometimes even mutates, like as is the case with Netflix. And I'm sure most of you in this first milestone have at least made that effort in just digitizing your courses. The second milestone is all about making content easy and ready online in different types of devices. Really responsive design so that it's displayed differently depending on the device it's being used by the student, by the learner. And the third milestone is about enriching your content with metadata or decorating it so that internal and external users can find and discover it. Incrementally, you build on these capabilities to further your ability to efficiently deliver that same content to multiple channels from a single source of truth. And that's the fourth milestone, single source publishing, publishing from a single source of truth. With the first milestone or two, you may have minimal disruption to your upstream editorial processes. But the ultimate destination is not just to one of those future capabilities, but to have content agility, because content agility really brings future freedom of action that enables innovation. So in our vision mapping approach, we found that successful digital transformation requires looking holistically at content, process, and people. And really, technology is the enabler, and we put content and data at the very center. So with all of that context that Stephen and I gave, we're going to give some surveys on each of those 4 areas, get some of your feedback around content, and then talk about what we're seeing with your results, with some of your answers. And
So
then we'll talk about.
Could we put up the first set of polling questions, please?
Yes.
Are they up? There we go.
So give you a couple of minutes to fill this out. Let's see what we get, and interested to see. And these are some of the examples of the kind of areas that we dig around in understanding where you are today in your content.
Now, I'm actually not seeing the button to end the poll and display the results.
Oh,
there we go.
Okay, very interesting.
So Renee, what do you make out of some of these first responses about content structure? There's a large amount of people that don't really agree that content is structured and easy to find.
Yeah, exactly. So, several things that we see as kind of characteristics of some of that. It might be that that content is, as we talked about, difficult to reuse or repurpose or create derivatives. There might be, a lot of things like duplicated content where where's the right version? What's the right version? Strategies in being able to have content tied back to the actual front end where you can start to collect usage and analytics in your LMS and tying that back to the source. Some have Word, Microsoft Word or PowerPoint, and find that very restrictive to being able to easily repurpose content. I did lose the results.
So did I.
So I'm not sure. I was just scrolling down, getting some. Oh, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we talk. Question 2 is around having a content architecture that allows and enables a single source of truth. That might be the way that you manage content in smaller chunks, maybe even in structured authoring approach like XHTML or XML, where there is learning objects that are consumed in multiple courses and you update once, reuse in many places. As a strategy for managing content and being able to create quickly new derivatives for different audiences. A lot of the things that we'll talk about a little bit in content is around metadata, which can help to enable discoverability. So our content is easy to access and find across the whole organization. Somewhat disagree, 46% there. We find that a lot. With difficulties in being able to find content.
So Renee, when we see a poll like this, where there's pretty strong disagreement, and we could talk about the differences as we go through here and kind of how that sorts out, what are some of the actions that we might recommend an organization take that's kind of falling in this category?
Right. I think that investing in content, investing in the content architecture, reducing the silos so that there's less of organizations where you find or places where you find content, and putting into place for discoverability that a lot of that relies upon metadata. Having better practices and ways of measuring the quality of metadata that gets applied to the content, and even ways of automating the applying of metadata has greatly improved findability, discoverability internally and externally. moving towards structured authoring or digital first formats like XML has been, you know, a root of capabilities that drive the nirvana of content agility, because you start to being able to create chunks of content, and those can be reused in lots of different contexts. I think one of the things that we're also seeing, and maybe I should start to get you to advance some of the slides here, and we can talk a little bit more about some of the other ideas that we've seen.
Mm-hmm.
One is that enrichment or metadata. A content strategy I found that successful considers the 3 C's about metadata. Metadata is often in organizations a big mess that might be managed in, you know, outside of the content and often duplicated. It's often incomplete, inconsistent. So creating ways of capturing and sustaining the quality of metadata as part of a content strategy is equal to the content itself in quality measurements and efficiencies, I think is a big capability. Because if you go to the next one, capabilities like adaptive learning, not just adaptive learning, but adaptive learning as an example, you know, really at the heart of it rely on good metadata to drive it. So if you have a modular curriculum enriched with metadata, you have an LMS that captures student actions. If the metadata is bad, then those things are not going to work very well and flow very well in a user experience. Certainly the data analysis out of that would not be consistent or not well formed. So, you know, these types of capabilities really rely upon good, rich metadata to drive it.
There's a really good example of adaptive learning that we talked about in the hospital setting, where a nurse going into surgery may take a couple of a short question about the surgery, and if they answer the questions correctly, then boom, fine, they're good to go. But if there's some question or doubt, then a video could pop up explaining some of the capabilities or some of the essential elements of the surgery, is kind of where some of this technology can help drive the learning organization.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's one of the other things is not to think about just content as you know, linear isolated things, but really looking at your whole set of content as pieces that all interrelate. How do they relate together, and being able to describe the relationships from content asset to content asset, and even modeling it for things that may never be exposed externally. For example, you write and create a learning object. How does that support a persona? How does that support a topic? That topic may or may not be exposed externally. It's just used for you to manage your content coverage. How does your content, you know, where do you have a lot of coverage? Where do you, on topics, where do you have some gaps that might inform where content is needed and where the focus is? How do you know, if there's standards that you have to align to, or standards that you leverage to, you know, create your content, how does your content down to a very granular level align to very granular levels of the standards, so that you can see where you have content standards coverage. So this is an example of where you can start to take content and make it into knowledge, so that you can start to see how all of your domain is interrelated, and start to normalize and start to get rid of duplicates as well.
Yeah.
So let's start to take on a process.
Excellent. Yeah, and I don't think we mentioned, we typically cover in a vision mapping, we we want to look, and we want you to look across 4 dimensions: people, process, content, and technology. And so we're going to ask questions in each of those areas, um, and kind of drill into that, like Renee just did with content. This area is process. I'll give you a minute to respond. I can't see how the polling is going and whether or not we're starting to level off or not. I don't know, Renee, if you have that view.
I don't.
Well, let's go on and end the poll then and look at the results. Thank you. So here we're talking about process, and we are looking at things like whether or not processes are well defined. Again, we see a pretty wide variance. One of the things I mentioned a little bit earlier is that it's not only identifying where there may be weaknesses or where there may be strengths in an organization on any of these various arenas, any of these various topic areas, but also to identify where there are differences within the organization. So if we were doing this for real, we would know at least the groups that are involved in the discussion or in the responses. So we might find that there's a very different view from the executive team than people that are on the ground doing the work. Or we may find that there's a very different view from people that are in parallel teams that are working towards the same goal. And when we get into change management, this provides a pretty good foundation for putting together some of your change management plans. In this particular one, we look across here and we see that processes are some believe that they're well defined. And if this were a single organization, we'd really want to drill in and talk about why there are differences. Why do some people agree that processes are well defined and some do not? Similar, there's much more even distribution that I see in the second question around roles that are involved in the content lifecycle, leveraging tools and capabilities. There's a lot of strength here on the third question related to teams having full visibility into the workflow and that traceability, which is a very critical thing to be able to measure and understand what's happening in the business processes, especially as you get more agile and you are getting more flexible to be able to understand what's going on there. So I don't know what the breadth that we see in process discussions run from very much ad hoc, probably wasting a lot of time, doing a lot of rework, and not being able to track things very well. And it looks like there may be some people in the audience today that feel like they're kind of in that spot, running up to where collaboration starts to engage a little bit better. There's more collaboration, there's more support for collaboration in the organization, and the automation starts to pick up a little bit to manage some of the workflows and such. So the reason process is important to the CLO, we're digging into a little bit of detail here, and getting a little bit granular. But it really does tie back to the challenges that the CLO is facing. And it ties back into our ability to be able to deliver flexibly and agilely, is that a word? To the organization in response to business needs. If you don't have a good handle on processes, you may not have well-defined, repeatable processes that can be used to tie back to the analytics that Renee was talking about. And also for the instructional designers and for the content aggregators on your teams, without strong process, it's very difficult to respond. It's difficult to respond to change. It's difficult to respond to action, and it's difficult to tie what you're doing back to the goals of the business. So some of the things that we may recommend here in this, where I'm kind of the pattern that I'm seeing here is to look at what's working and what's not, and try to identify some quick wins. Try to identify some areas that we can make quick changes that will improve control over process. And as you move more up towards that agree area and really have strength in streamlining and automating of processes, then we start to look for ways that you can re-engineer and actually transform processes even beyond that to add positive business outcomes. So this slide, you may remember from just a little bit earlier. And it highlights many of the challenges that we face to enable that agility and to enable the alignment that our organizations need. And when we go through and work through this process dimension, what we're trying to aim for is to move from that scattershot picture to something that resembles more of an orderly flow with content discoverable and easily assembled and distributed in different forms. Now, the interesting thing to me about this, and it's almost counterintuitive, is that it's in this order and structure that we're actually able to deliver agility. It's by taking noise out of the process and by organizing learning content in such a way that it can easily be reused. We enable an agility and responsiveness to changing conditions and to urgent needs of the business. I think we're going to go to the next set of questions, please. And this is about technology, and we will give you a few minutes to respond there. And also, please, if you have any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat or the Q&A section, and we'll address those as we get towards the end of the session. What do you think, Renee? Should we close the poll?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
And let's see the results.
Okay. Pretty lots of different perspectives here. That's good and interesting to see. Good to see. So one of the things that you know, we're big about leveraging technology and fitting technology, but it's an enabler, I think, that supports the business in the way that they create and manage and distribute content and the processes. Technology is definitely an enabler. So, you know, it's oftentimes where I see organizations, you know, go straight for the technology as, you know, I said earlier, the magic bullet. But, you know, there's looking at where technology is not supporting the business is just as telling to me of where you know, just getting requirements, because those are truly telling where it's failing. Technology is failing today. But, you know, technology, in the first question is asking about, you know, just is it adaptable? Is it supporting you? Is it scalable? Is it performant? Looks like there's kind of it's slanting towards either just the middle of the range, with mostly agreeing that it does. Sometimes we see organizations that have old technologies, or technologies that are really the root cause to inefficiencies or wasted money, because, you know, you can't update the content in more than one place. You have to recommission or recreate content that you may already have. So it may not be that it's blatantly not you know, supporting your needs. It may just be that it doesn't have capabilities that are allowing you to do the things that you need to do to support your editorial flows, your editorial processes. I think, you know, a lot of you know, organizations make what they have work. It may not be fit for purpose, but they adapt and they learn to use technology and bend it towards their processes.
One of the interesting things I see here, Renee, is that in question number 1 and 4, we've got pretty strong agreement that those statements are true, and it's talking about adaptability and scalability of technology. And the 4th one is talking again about stability and performance. But then you get into whether or not the systems and the technology are actually supporting what needs to be done, and it may be a leap for, you know, in some of this with the particular way the questions are worded. But when you look at whether or not the technology is helping really advance the organization, that's where there's more disagreement. So it's like the technology we have runs well, but it's not doing exactly what we want it to do.
Right. It's a very good point, because one of the things that in any thing to look at is what's the roadmap, right? What technologies do you have? We've actually find in a lot of cases, looking at the technology landscape, is where are there technologies that organizations are not leveraging to its fullest. See a lot of things that could be used in a lot better way, but the, you know, old habits of old processes just sort of let functionality or capabilities not be leveraged. So first is to look at the existing technology landscape and knowing what kinds of technologies that you could take advantage of that you're not, and then looking at capabilities in a way that you can roadmap them and evolve them over time. So what kinds of capabilities will deliver some quick wins? What technologies are needed versus you know, that you have that can be leveraged, and what technologies you know, need to be acquired, either built or bought, and how do you maintain them over time, and how do you evolve them over time in a phased way? Usually any sort of digital transformation is never a one and done kind of thing. You want to make sure that it's going to deliver some quick wins, but a year or 2 years from now, how is that going to evolve with your business to give you new capabilities over that timeline? I think some things where we're seeing more and more capabilities is organizations using more and more machine learning tools and graph technologies. I showed you an example of a knowledge graph in my earlier slide around content, around creating relationships among content assets so that you can see why things are related, relating them to topics or relating them to personas or relating them to each other, and expressing why those things are related. Graph databases and graph technologies are certainly some areas of where organizations are putting their content to sort of enable those relationships to be mined and exposed and surfaced to support future freedom of action and greater automation of their content. Yep. One of the other points, one more point to make, it just went away, but one of the things too is that we see several different kind of scoring on integration, but certainly that content isn't, that you don't have silos of technology that don't communicate with one another. Most good modern applications and tools have APIs that can connect these things together in a seamless way, which really also helps with the duplication of things like metadata. Where is your single source of truth for metadata? Where are you keeping it? It may be displayed in one system, but where are you updating and maintaining it? It may need to be pushed and displayed in another system, and creating that sort of ecosystem of all the technology so that it's updated and best leveraged by the people that can capture that information, or systems can automate the capture of that information, I think is something to consider. And to that point, understanding your system landscape when you're putting a new tool in, or really focusing on a particular capability like a learning content management system or editorial workflows as an example. What are all the groups and roles that need to interact with that technology? What capabilities and tasks do each role needs to perform? What systems need to be integrated to support that rather than duplicating content or metadata? Where is its single source of truth, and is it being pushed or pulled into that system? And what are the inputs and outputs needed? So, creating this sort of system landscape, especially when you have a center of something that's like your content store, your content repository, your editorial workflow, which is all the back end to your LMS front ends. Like what are all the roles and the people and the capabilities that need to support that? Okay, next. And again, a trend that we're seeing with more sophisticated clients getting with more than just dealing with documents or web pages of content, is really creating and managing learning objects and then relating them all together. I expressed that in the earlier slide about content, but the technology that could be leveraged to support that is graph databases, because they're going to manage your entire graph, your content as a graph and all the relationships between them. And that could be leveraged in internal ways and external ways to navigate the content and know what the dependencies are. When you update one thing, what other updates do you need to make to related content? And having visibility of things like your content coverage. So this is also how not just tying your corporate, your learning content, but also maybe your marketing content, maybe also rights and royalty information, maybe external information that come from standards organizations could be lumped into this, and it all be graphed and interrelated together. to represent your entire knowledge domain, and the technology that can support that is graph databases. There's a number of them on the market, and we're seeing more and more organizations that utilize that.
Huh. So if we can put up the last set of questions. These are related to people. Again, we'll give you a couple of minutes to answer these. I do see that there are a number of comments, so we will go back through the comments here in just a couple of minutes. All right, let's go on and close the poll and show the results. Okay. So we're easily and efficiently able to support distributed or remote teams. No surprise that we've got a lot of agree and strongly agree, and we've all experienced a lot of that over the last 6 or 7 months. So that is very good to see. A few folks that do not agree with that, but general strong agreement. The teams are engaged in tasks that are appropriate to their role. Again, very strong agreement, which is good, which means you're getting the alignment that you need between the organization and the organizational goals. And when we talk about vision mapping, that's one of the biggest benefits of vision mapping is that alignment. You know, we've talked about some of the details in each of those pillars, if you will, of people, process, content, and technology. And the value that we get from doing this vision mapping is starting with an understanding of where you want to go, where the organization wants to go, figuring out where we are. And that's kind of what we're doing with these polls in a way, is taking the first step in there and then putting together a map of these actions, which we've been talking about, put together that armory of action that we can use to deliver on the vision. And then the organizations are, pretty strong agreement that you're open to change and eager to use new tools, which is interesting. It ties back to tools that don't necessarily do what you need them to be doing, but you're ready and anxious to do that, to utilize them.
Yeah, this is jumping in, Stephen,
Please.
about teams engaged in the right role, for engaged in their tasks that are appropriate for their role. I know that you and I worked on a project not terribly long ago, where we were looking at processes and really looking at what roles were engaged in each one of those tasks in the process, and found it was actually a legal publisher using lawyers, very highly skilled lawyers, and fixing broken links. And it was not even necessarily skill aligned. It was like, why are we doing this in the first place? So that was an example of something where there was skills that were under utilized for the kinds of tasks that were in that particular process, and how could we eliminate that problem from the get-go. That was an example that came to mind when I was looking at that question, was that kind of misalignment that we sometimes see when we dig in.
Yeah. Interesting. So as this group obviously knows, change management is very critical to the implementation and critical to your overall success. And on the implementation front, it's not just about installing technology, and we've talked about that throughout this last hour, that drives change, but it's the adoption of technology and processes by people that lead to that success. And driving that adoption towards actions and processes that are aligned with the business goals is the real key benefit we're talking about here. That you can see, and I'm sure each person on this call has war stories about bad change management and what can happen with bad change management, where change can become unsustainable, adoption is inconsistent, people ignore the change because it's just the program of the month, and ultimately it leads to frustration, frustrating teams. The fourth bullet point on the right-hand side of the screen talks about utilizing well-formed surveys as an analysis tool to understand how joined up the organization is. The poll questions we use today could be used, for example, to look across the organization. And I talked a little bit about that earlier, to identify where there may be differing perspectives that need to be aligned, or to identify blind spots towards an action plan. And I mentioned the C-suite may be different than the view of people doing the work. And you may see, and we have seen, marked differences in perception from different teams that are contributing to the same goal. And utilizing tools and techniques in order to draw those differences out and understand them is a very essential first step in the in that change management process from our point of view, certainly. So I hope you had a little bit of fun and had a little bit different experience with the session. And what we did today was really just kind of the starting point. It's actually an input to what a vision mapping should be. And ultimately, the goal of vision mapping is to develop a plan that enables business value by aligning actions with strategic goals and objectives. And we do it by identifying what those goals and objectives are, figuring out where we are today, identifying what sort of changes need to take place in order to align with and achieve the goals of the organization, and put together a map to get there. We use the exercise today to talk a bit about current state as an indicator of problem areas and as a starting point for action planning. And as you go through vision mapping, you'll ultimately develop a roadmap and a budget for all of those enabling actions. So if you'd like to answer the questionnaire for yourself or for your organization, or to play around with it, or this would be one way to contact us as well, you can utilize the URL at the bottom of the page to access the survey. Actually, be the same questions we just went through today. So I'd like to thank you all very much, and please feel free to reach out to myself or Renee. Our contact information is on the screen, and I'm going to, I don't know, Renee, can you open the chat as well to see what questions we may have had? So we are going to, I'm going to scroll back up towards the beginning of this a little bit. People looking forward.
Love the paper behind glass reference. That's surprisingly some people's perspective of digital transformation, but so you have, can you recommend a specific CLMS tool? You know, there's lots, and I think it's kind of a question to understand more about the context of what you're trying to do with your content, your content strategy, and your processes should sort of drive the selection of a CLMS. So that's or an LCMS.
I see
would
that
think
there
that,
were,
where you're taking your process or content. Yep. So great.
I see there were a number of issues with the pop-up, and I
Yeah.
apologize for that. But here's an interesting comment. Do you see content integration along with CRM systems? Is that possible through an API? And yes, it very
Yeah.
much is possible. Obviously, it depends on the CRM that you're utilizing or whether or not the API is developed. That can be exercised, but many of the ones that we've worked with have APIs that can allow that to happen.
Yeah. That's a great example of where metadata flow through is and can be really leveraged through an integration like that.
And I like the comment here. I think it's also important to consider how employees are doing their work via Slack as an example, and making sure those systems are also integrated and can share content. And it is super critical for adoption, and it's super critical to provide the flexibility and the agility that we've been talking about. One of the things that some of the questions around, I believe it was were the technology questions, were talking about knowledge management and engaging with employees in this, where they engaging where they are. It's not only about putting learning in the flow of work, but it's about engaging the employees with the tools that they're using and capturing appropriate information, capturing knowledge, and distributing information to them as well. And it also, by utilizing tools that they are familiar with and are already using, if you can design processes and design the distribution of learning through those tools, it certainly does help adoption, because you're not necessarily introducing anything new, but you're fitting in with the environment. And I think that one of the L&D leader quotes that we showed talked about learning and understanding what employees and what learners are actually doing,
Yeah.
to fit into that and to align with it. And that seems to be about it, except for we seem to get stopped at just the concept of CRM integration. I'm not sure if you're talking in that comment specifically about what our discussion was or about you as your organization, but there are certainly other integration opportunities within the organization. And one thing that when you get into the vision mapping and you get into the current state analysis, if you will, it's to understand what are the various tools and techniques that are being used and what technology is deployed in order to figure out where the appropriate integrations are. And I don't know, I think we are running out of time, and we're dropping participants as they are scurrying off and rushing to the next session. Renee, any parting words of wisdom?
No, thank you for everyone. Nice to speak with you today.
Thank you very much. And again, I hope it was a little bit of a break.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy the rest of the day.
Bye-bye.